Sudden blackouts. Gas pumps and ATMs offline. Airports go dark. Subways trapped in pitch-black tunnels. An entire nation plunged into darkness in just 5 seconds. Americans wonder, could it happen here? I'm Hayden Ludwig. This isn't a movie, it's the total collapse of Spain's electrical grid just months ago in April 2025. The culprit? Over-reliance on wind and solar to power Spain's economy. The green energy we were told would save the world from climate change now threatens to destroy it. But have the climate activists already lost the fight? Here to discuss the collapse of climate activism and the threat to the power grid is Jeff Reynolds, Senior Editor for Restoration News. Jeff, welcome to Restoration Spotlight.
Thanks again for having me, Hayden. This is a great time.
So Spain and Portugal were supposed to be shining examples of the endless, inevitable march towards net zero. And by net zero, of course, we're talking about a 100% petroleum-free economy. Obviously a fantasy, as we discovered. Well, let's go back to actually what happened in April. So April 16th, Spain announces that it had finally reached 100% renewable energy on its electric grid. 12 days later, the whole thing falls apart. Jeff, walk us through exactly what happened here.
Yeah, so they rely completely on wind and solar. They actually have a pretty significant amount of hydroelectric as well, but they were, yes, that's right. And but they were completely relying on wind and solar this day, April 28th. They are also backstopped by France with their nuclear supply, but they went 100% with renewable energy on this day. They thought this was a grand achievement. What ended up happening is there was a dead period in the wind blowing, and there was also heavy cloud cover, both of which ended rather precipitously. So the sun started shining all at once and the wind started blowing all at once. There was a big storm that rolled through. So what that created was a surge in their electrical grid, and they were not prepared for that. The electrical grid has to run on a very tight frequency. It has to be on 50 megahertz, and any fluctuation in that frequency can cause real disruptions with the industrial and the residential applications that are used on the electrical grid. And that's exactly what happened. They ended up having a large surge go through where the automated systems in the residential and the industrial power distribution net shut down, which caused an entire cascading problem to shut down the entire grid. The grid was non-operational, and this whole event lasted an entire second and a half, and
Wow.
It shut down the grid for an entire day almost.
Okay, so if I can interrupt you, so that's weather. That's not a freak storm. That's not a hurricane like Katrina or something. That's just everyday weather. The wind stops blowing and the clouds move in. And you're saying that was enough, that and the sun coming back and the wind blowing again, that was enough to overload an entire national electrical grid.
Right, not only, well, two nations, Spain and Portugal, because Portugal buys a bunch of its power from Spain, so they both went down for an entire day, and it almost spread to France as well, and then it would have gone to the rest of the continent, except that France has automated systems that shut down the interface between France and Spain. France provides the backup power load for Spain's renewable energy, because renewable has to have a baseline of static electric, not static, but a consistent electrical supply to keep everything moving so that there's no surges like what happened in Spain. They didn't have that because they were on 100% renewable. Normally they get their power back up from France's nuclear supply, but it shut down because of the surge in the system.
So they're literally standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, their entire renewable electrical grid is a farce.
But that's the entire point of renewables. Renewables cannot provide that baseline power load. They are variable by their very nature. They cannot be baseline. So they require some sort of conventional power source as a backup supply.
So let's get into renewables. I love to call them unreliables. I think
Yes.
it's a better description of everything. Of course, everything is renewable after a certain period of time.
Sure,
right?
sure,
But
yeah.
but even not even playing games here. it's not something consistent. And if we understand the electrical grid, it doesn't really care what your ideology is. It's an engineering and physics question about whether it's going to work, right? So one of the problems you're identifying is that if you have something that's variable enough where, depending on the weather of the day, it may or may not receive enough electricity or even may receive too much electricity, that's not consistent. You can't power a home on that, can you? Or you can't run an electrical grid on that, can you?
You can power a home with a small dedicated solar system, or with a sufficient battery backup. The problem is that you can't scale it. You have problems with solar and wind that take up this enormous footprint of land that's dedicated. Never mind the battery backup that's required. That takes up space, and it's dirtier than it's advertised to be. So there's all kinds of problems with the idea that you can take renewables, put them on, take all that power, put it into a battery, and then use it for steady supply. It doesn't work out the way the proponents say it does.
Well, and just focusing on the solar aspect, we're not talking about Norway, right? This is a country bathing in the sun most days of the year. It's like Arizona or Southern California, right? It should be close to ideal for solar farms, and yet even there, it didn't seem to work out.
Yeah, no, that's right, because you have weather patterns. It's on the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. You have significant changes in the weather all the time, and so yeah, the cloud cover is going to significantly affect the ability to produce solar power. That's exactly right.
What's the problem for Europe continent-wide basing its electrical grid off of these unreliables?
That they're unreliable. The fact that you have to have that baseline source, even if you're dedicated to net zero, you can't get all the way there because you have to have something that's reliable, that keeps the frequency at 50 megahertz. It keeps the power steadily running through the grid. You can't just turn off a grid and turn it back on. It's a whole process. And then the end users also have to be able to rely on a steady power stream so that they don't automatically cut out their connection to the grid. So there's all kinds of these problems that you can't go 100% renewable. The entire continent, if it were on renewables only, there's not enough power available to do that. And you also end up, as Donald Trump pointed out in his first term, he told the Germans that their over-reliance on natural gas piped in from Russia was going to cause them problems. He got laughed at, but then it turned out to be absolutely true after the Nord Stream pipelines got blown up.
Now, advocates on the other side would point out, well, see, but that's a reason for us to try and be energy self-sufficient. In the United States, you're energy self-sufficient. Why wouldn't we want to harness something like wind or the sun shining every day, or at least part of the year anyway? Why would we not want to take advantage of these free resources that are always everywhere at the same time, right? Especially when you may not have abundant coal, or you don't want to use coal. You may not have abundant natural gas. You may not have, like in Germany, a lot of nuclear power. What's the pushback against that argument?
Well, first of all, Germany not having a lot of nuclear power is a political question, not a resource question.
Explain that.
Meaning that France runs 70% of its grid off of nuclear power. Yeah. Germany has almost no nuclear power, and that's a political calculation on their part. They don't want nuclear because of the anti-nuke protests from the 70s.
The Greens.
The Greens and all of that stuff. So Greenpeace and all that.
Yeah. Well, are we overstating this, though? I mean, a blackout every once in a while, that happens. We're used to weather coming in and you have a brownout, the lights flicker suddenly. Why is it a big deal if the electrical grid goes out once in a blue moon, they might ask?
We shouldn't be used to brownouts. That's not something that should be happening in a modern society.
Oh, your standards are too high.
But that's the problem, right? Is that we've lowered our standards society-wide, and that's one of those areas where we've just sort of accepted it as a cost of doing business when we go to net zero. But renewables just aren't going to. So you talked about the resource being free, the wind or the solar source of the power. Yeah, that stuff's free on the outside. It's the harnessing of that energy that is not free, and it doesn't pencil out. It's actually much more expensive and difficult to achieve than the proponents say it is.
Can't you just turn an electrical grid back on if it goes out?
No, we proved that in Spain and Portugal on April 28th. It took them almost an entire day to turn their grid back on.
How can that be, though? I mean, turn a light switch on, turn it off. How can it be that much different?
Well, it's it's so much different from a end user standpoint than all of these systems, industrial systems and residential power providing systems are not just a simple light switch. They are automated systems that have certain requirements, and as I've mentioned previously, it's based on the fact that they need a very steady frequency of 50 megahertz in the entire system, and any fluctuations in the frequency of the power that's going through the power lines will cause these systems to overload or underload and cause them to automatically shut down.
What happened in Spain and Portugal in April, of course, wasn't a cyber attack, but it very easily could have been. Describe for us the national security implications of making ourselves more dependent on something that is easily taken down. You could think of bombs taking out these systems.
Or cyber attacks.
Or cyber attacks, for that matter. Yeah. We know in the United States that the Chinese have hacked into utility providers in places like Texas and Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. In Massachusetts, it took, I believe, about 200 days for federal authorities, whose job it is to look for this, to even to sniff out that these Chinese hackers had infiltrated the system here. How big a deal is this for Europeans and for Americans who want to see a little more solar and wind on the grid?
Well, it's a very big deal, especially considering that we just had a revelation this year that the Chinese, who supply almost all of our technology for renewables, all the wind turbines and all the solar panels, most of the solar panels, had implanted surveillance devices and microchips into all of those implements, so that they were at least surveilling all of our power usage and power distribution. Never mind whether or not they implanted a kill switch in those.
Wow, a remote kill switch.
Right, and so that alone indicates that we should not be relying on our global adversaries for infrastructure. Right. It seems to make sense to most voters. I don't understand why the professional left thinks that that's a conspiracy theory.
Well, you're not profiting off of it. So.
Well, that's exactly right, yes. But, so yeah. The idea that we're relying on a global adversary who is known to be implanting malware and surveillance chips into our grid components is a big deal. It's something that we should take a lot more seriously, and we don't. But that then leaves open all these vulnerabilities to hackers and cyber attacks, which we've seen over and over again. The grid operators deal with constant probes and cyber attacks from Russia, from China, from teenagers in Iowa, from everybody, just to see if they can get in. And kudos to them for keeping us as secure as they do, but there are still lots of vulnerabilities, and it would take quite an investment of resources to secure all of the things that are open that could leave us open to massive problems.
Let's talk more about the green movement here. I'm interested in why so many are on the right, too, not just the left, interested in advancing this climate agenda. Is it an economics position? Is it a question of polluting the environment with carbon dioxide? Give us the facts on this.
Yeah, so I think there are two perspectives here. I'll talk about the left first. That's a lot more obvious. They're about control. Everything that the left tries to advance, if it were such a good idea, why does it have to be mandated? Because
profits over people, Jeff. Obviously, we know this.
Yeah, no, but that's such a false premise. The idea that making a profit or being concerned about economic development or economic security is somehow antithetical to human rights. It's actually the most basic human right, is the idea that you can do your own thing, you can run your own economy, you can run your own family and your own life, and have the ability to take advantage of free markets. Free markets are the most moral way to run an economy. Yeah. But that's an economic question. It's not necessarily an electricity question, but it's the same fundamental principle that they want a command top-down economy, much like what you see in Soviet Russia or the Chinese Communist Party.
So that's the left.
Yes.
What about the pro-climate right?
The pro-climate right is an interesting mix of folks who are unwilling to fight back, and maybe some people that are on the dole, and just in general not really understanding the depths of the issue and realizing that the climate scare is not actually a legitimate scare. They've been sort of cowed into believing the dominant narrative that global warming has now turned into global boiling, as Antonio Guterres told us last.
I like climate weirding as my favorite one.
I haven't heard that one. That's actually quite funny. Whatever. I mean, the climate's always been weird. The climate's always changed. The climate has always been dynamic. It always moves and changes. It is a dynamic system. And the idea, by the way, that we can know what the inputs and outputs are going to be because we have a computer model that models all this stuff is absurdly unrealistic, because it is such a dynamic, huge system, such a complex system. There's no way any one computer model can accurately measure all those inputs and outputs.
Over a long enough period, it'll snow in the Sahara Desert if you look at enough data over a long enough period.
I'm sure it has with continental drift over a period of hundreds of millions of years.
They know this. They've documented this.
Yeah, sure.
So the idea that weather is indicative of a changing climate that has anything to do with human behavior is awfully presumptuous.
It's awfully presumptuous, and they deliberately discount any inputs of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from the natural biosphere. Volcanic activity, biological activity that's not human. There are quadrillions of insects on this planet that have biological processes that produce carbon dioxide. Sure. So there are so many inputs that they don't even account for, that they can't account for, and they just blow right by that.
Is carbon dioxide a pollutant?
Absolutely not. The idea that we're increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's no doubt about that. Nobody questions that. We have observational data that shows that.
There's more of us.
Yes, there's more of us, but I'm not convinced that human activity is a significant driver of carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere. It's a driver. I'm not sure how significant it is, given that we know from geological studies that carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere always follow warming periods in the climatic record.
Okay, wow. So let's focus on that.
Climatic record.
We always hear the other way around. Right?
That's right.
Climate, not climate, carbon dioxide, CO2 levels rise, fall, and then after that you see the global temperature rise. You're saying it's actually the other way around. Temperature rises followed by CO2 increase.
This isn't even controversial. This is well known. If you go back through the geological record over hundreds of millions and billions of years, well, hundreds of millions of years, they can go back with ice cores and such. Sure. They know that carbon dioxide rise in the atmosphere always follows temperature rise, or precedes temperature, follows temperature rise.
Yes, understood. Understood.
Yes. So it completely reverses cause and effect that underpins the very theory of anthropogenic global warming.
So climate scientists presumably would know this, would learn this if their education is worth anything.
Right.
And yet that fact that you just laid out would completely undermine the entire climate movement. Since James Hansen in 1984, I think it is.
88.
1988, thank you, testifying before Congress about the greenhouse effect, greenhouse effect driven by greenhouse gases, chiefly carbon dioxide, that's CO2. Right? Since 1988, this has been a staple of the green movement.
You know, and I'll give you another demonstration of this. If it were because of the Industrial Revolution and the fact that we're burning more petroleum and releasing more carbon dioxide, the Industrial Revolution is not a straight line on a graph. It's a logarithmic, it's a hyperbolic curve. So, you know, we were kind of industrial, and then we get more industrial, more industrial. So the curve would be like this.
It grows on itself.
Right, exactly. So the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would necessarily be a curve. It's not. It's a straight line.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which implies what?
Which implies that it's due to the natural increase in temperatures as we are still coming out of an ice age 12,000 years ago. So it's actually just it's much more likely that it's driven by solar cycles, and we are still coming out of the last ice age. We're not done coming out of that ice age.
Jeff, how old is climate science as a study, I mean?
Oh, it's thousands of years old. If you go back to people trying to predict crop yields. And
okay,
that sort
fair
of thing.
enough.
Yeah.
I mean, end of question. No, I mean, of course, like how old is modern climate science? You know, the kind frequently talked about on CNN, but really, how old is that study?
Right. I mean, that goes back to probably the 50s or so. The idea of the greenhouse effect first came about in the late 1800s. And so the idea of studying the climate, because we've tried to study weather for military purposes and for industrial purposes and agricultural.
Now, how long have we been measuring things like greenhouse gases?
The idea came up in the late 1800s, and we've gotten more and more sophisticated in our ability to measure that.
Let's call it maybe 150 years at the high end, being generous.
At the high end, yes.
Being generous here.
Because we still have, our temperature record isn't all that great going back more than 150 years. So not only the measuring of the CO2 in the atmosphere, but also the temperature itself isn't all that reliable because we didn't have sophisticated instruments.
And yet climatologists would extrapolate from maybe 150 years of data information that goes back thousands of years concerning actual climate change.
Right.
Seems like a stretch to me.
It is a bit of a stretch because you have all kinds of historical geological data that they've reconstructed based on tree rings, based on ice cores, that kind of thing. They can go back hundreds and thousands of years using those types of methods and recreating it based on presumptions that they have about what they're looking at, what it actually means. So, the famous example is tree rings, where the thinner tree ring means that it was a lower growing season
absorbing
during
less
that year.
CO2.
Right, so they grew less, so that means that there was less CO2 in the atmosphere. What they've done, what Michael Mann has gotten in trouble for is his famous hockey stick graph that stitches together two different data sets. So what it does is it takes tree ring data up until the 60s, and then it takes satellite data from the 70s onward and stitches that together to come up with this idea that there's more CO2 than there was, and the temperature data is going up like this instead of going up in a straight line. Or if there's any trend at all.
Are there critics of Mann's study?
Well, yeah. One of them just had a court victory against him. Mark Stein, the columnist who was writing at the time for National Review in 2012, wrote a column calling man a fraud and a few other dirty names, and he got sued for libel over that. He was found in 2024 to be liable for that and had to pay $1 million in punitive fines. Wow. That just got reduced a couple of months ago to $5,000. So, Michael Mann was required to pay legal costs for some of the other folks he sued. So it's a big mess, but the initial award for Michael Mann has been reduced and will probably be appealed out of existence.
But winning that case, does that undergird Mann's original argument about global warming?
Not really, no, because what he sued over was libel, and he had a lot of his evidence thrown out that showed that his data set was valid, and the jury found in his favor anyway. So the court, this gets into technical stuff with how the court ruled and how the jury saw the evidence and how much evidence they were allowed to see and all of that stuff. So, but the bottom line is that a lot of his testimony and his data was not reviewed by the jury, and it was a friendly jury in the Washington, D.C. District Court. So
famous for its friendly juries.
Yes, friendly to leftist causes. So yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I want to talk about an article you recently published focusing on the end of the climate movement. Now, that's a bold statement. It's been around, the environmental movement's been around since the 1960s, right? Came out of, you could trace it back earlier than that, but I think the modern environmental movement goes back to anti-chemical and pollution and
Sure.
Sierra Club and things like that really started in the latter half of the 20th century
the book,
up to
The
today.
Silent Spring by Rachel Carson.
That's right.
Yeah.
A terrible book. I would not recommend. I've read it. It's horrible. It's not great. It's not even very scientifically valid, but that's a different point. But again, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, Jeff. I mean, saying it's on its last legs or it's losing the fight is a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, but you're seeing even Democrats are backing away. 35 congressional Democrats recently voted with Republicans to end the EV, the special carve out that California got for mandating electric vehicles. Yes. And so you're seeing that they're seeing electoral consequences for radical green policies.
Which is why they crossed over to support the ending of EV mandate policies, nationwide. Yes.
Yeah,
that's stunning.
Yeah, that is, but you're going to see more of that, and you're also starting to see investment firms and mutual funds pulling out of their investments in green energy. You're seeing corporate boardrooms quietly change their policies, saying that they all took these bold stands that we stand with the climate, and now they're starting to water those down. You're seeing a lot of investments being pulled back from all of these industries, the EV industry, and especially now that Trump has come in to his second term, Trump 2.0 is pulling out of all of the green boondoggles, the federal funding and the grants and the subsidies and all the stuff that's gone into wind power, EVs, solar power, all the renewables, all that stuff is being pulled back. And all of that stuff is collapsing because it can't compete in the free market when internal combustion engines are still the most efficient way of getting around.
What will be the ultimate legacy of the whole green movement, in your opinion?
A gargantuan waste of money and one of the biggest hoaxes that has ever been perpetrated on the human race.
I mean, that's a bold statement.
Yeah, no, I mean, I believe that since before the tide started going out on the movement, but now you're seeing other people really start to accept that, because you're seeing that the voters have never prioritized global warming as an issue that they wanted addressed.
Yes,
I mean,
that's right.
They always say, well, I believe it's a problem, but they don't want to do more to help the environment when it affects their bottom line or their household budget.
Nobody wants to pay more than $1 a year, I believe it is, to save the planet. $1 a year, you could save the planet. Nope, that's too rich for my blood.
Yeah, that's a bridge too far.
That's a bridge too far for people who are deeply concerned about the climate.
Right. Which indicates that it's really more about virtue signaling and saying, I'm deeply concerned. I'm a quality human being. I want my friends to know that I care about these things.
That's right.
But I don't care enough to open my wallet.
A society built on virtue signaling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Jeff Reynolds, thank you for joining Restoration Spotlight.
Thank you, Hayden. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to coming back.
I'm Hayden Ludwig, and this is Restoration Spotlight, a project of Restoration News, your source of headline-smashing investigative journalism for the America First movement. Check us out at restoration-news.com. Until next time, stay vigilant and trust in God.